Hello, everyone, and welcome to our class on marketing. Now, in this class, we're going to be looking at different kind of models of analysis, which are going to give you, as an employee, as an employer, as a consultant, whatever your career path may turn into, or what it already is right now, a unique view, a unique perspective on doing the only two things that you're supposed to do, which is to identify problems and solve them. Now, to identify problems, you actually have to know where to look. So throughout this class, we're going to be looking at three broad models, which are going to identify what we call strengths and weaknesses within a company. So the things that a company might do well and give it a competitive advantage, and things, elements that a company might want to improve upon, because of course it's providing the company, of course, a weakness within its marketplace and compared to its competitors, of course. We are also going to look at factors that are external to the company. So these are elements that we don't control, but well, we really can't ignore. Factors such as our competition and changing social conditions, political and legal decisions that might affect us or the other players in our industry, economic factors. And of course, these days we're concerned with many of those economic factors that impact decisions that businesses have to take every day. So we're going to take a look at these three models throughout this class, and I think you're going to see how all of these models are really just a reflection of what's going on in the marketplace, and many of these things you're going to recognize yourself in your surroundings. So let's just jump in right away. I'm going to share the PowerPoints, which you already have, and we can jump into these unique and very interesting models, which are consistently used throughout business. So we've shared those. And we're going to put this in presentation mode. Let's go ahead and change the display setting. And there we go. So introduction to marketing, situational analysis, looking at the internal and external environment in which the company, of course, is operating. So as I mentioned to you, the very first part of this class is just basically a quick overview of the three models. And you're going to see that I use an example of a helicopter. So this is kind of a memo technique thing that I've developed, which I think will allow you to really have a visual sense of these particular three models. Then we're going to describe the factors that comprise the internal and external environment in which, of course, the company operates and which we'll have to analyze. And then, of course, once we know the elements that we need to find, then the question is, where do we find this information? And so we'll take a look at market research and to see what kind of sources of information are rigorous and provide us with the information to make the right decisions. So, of course, all of this is part of the integrated marketing model, which I've shared previously. And we are, as you can see in the left hand, still in the value exploration. So we are in the analysis of our environment. So it is completely obvious, I think, to many of you that we don't make decisions before fully understanding what's going on in our world. So we are in this analysis part, which of course concerns the internal and external environment, and of course market research, which provides us that information. So the organization, of course, does not operate in a vacuum. It operates within its own realm. And within this realm, we will find not only the company, and we'll look at the company, of course, but of course its suppliers. Sometimes those suppliers, we have a tremendously tight relationship. We are fully embedded with them, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. And sometimes we find that our own suppliers can actually be a threat to our organization, ironically. Or take a look at marketing intermediaries who assume certain functions within the value creation process for consumers, elements that perhaps we don't want to shoulder ourselves. We're going to take a look, of course, at our competitors, can't ignore them. Public institutions, which determine the laws and regulations in which we operate, which of course vary from one country to another. Of course, and we really should put this at the center of our thinking, are consumers, and how sometimes from one day to the next they change their objectives and how what they're looking for. Now, all of this will be encapsulated in this tremendous model, which is called the SWOT model. Now, if you have any doubt as to how much this particular model is used, I invite you to go on to Google, just put in the word SWOT and your favorite company, whether that be Apple, whether that be Starbucks, whether that be an airline company, or Tesla or any other company, and go into Google Images, and you're going to see something that looks a little bit like this. And what this is a model that allows us in a very simplistic way, I'll agree, but gives us definitely some good direction to identify those elements that are strengths and weaknesses within a company. And we'll call those internal and controllable. Internal and controllable, strengths and weaknesses. We will look then at opportunities and threats, which are external and uncontrollable. But despite the fact they are external and uncontrollable to the company, they cannot, of course, be ignored. All of this model allows us to make, of course, better decisions within our marketplace. Now, what the companies are looking for, of course, is to identify those trends in the marketplace, those opportunities, which combined with our strength, provide positive impact for the organization. Of course, there's a reason I put this in red, because those external factors, which are also threats and competitors, for instance, when combined with weaknesses of the company, enhance those threats and make them very, very dangerous for the company and can have a very negative impact on the organization. This is not to say, that we cannot take action to modify those threats. But before we do, as I mentioned in the introduction, we first have to identify them. So we are definitely in the analysis stage and not in the strategic decisions, which will, of course, come later. So now, to fully understand these three models, which I mentioned to you at the beginning, we have to understand that we start at the center. The center is, of course, your company, your organization. You're identifying those elements which are strengths and weaknesses. And consider this approach. Imagine that you have, for instance, let's say that you are a video game producer. Okay, so you are a worldwide company. You have offices a little bit everywhere, and you develop video games. Now imagine that we want to examine what's going on within that company. So let's say that within a certain geographic area, I have your company and I have a helicopter that's in the parking lot. Okay, so now that helicopter is going to lift off and it's going to hover just above your company. And what are we looking at? We are looking at only your company, nothing else. And within that company, we are trying to identify strengths and weaknesses. Now, of course, one can imagine we can go into many different directions. And some of you might identify some strengths and weaknesses, and others might identify other ones. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a list of all the elements that can contribute to strengths and weaknesses? Well, lucky for us, we actually do have such a model, which is called the value chain, as you can see here in yellow. Now, we are going to use that model to identify strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to give you plenty of examples of that in a second. Now, let's imagine that we lift off a little bit higher, and we now look at not only the company, but the industry in which that company operates. Now, oftentimes in a geographic area, is not always the case, but we might actually have a hub. A hub is where all of the different companies will group together. Think of Silicon Valley, for instance, in California. So now I've lifted up this helicopter a little bit more, and I don't only see my company, I see all the other companies, my competitors and my suppliers, and all the people that are involved within this industry of video gaming. We're not looking at any other industry, just video gaming. So now I'm looking at many different issues. Now, the question is there a list that would give me an idea of what might within that environment provide opportunities and threats to me? Well, there is. That environment is called the microenvironment because it is not specific to me, but within my industry, but it is fairly close to me. And we have a model that's called Porter's 5 Forces. Get to that in 1 second. That includes suppliers and distributors, buyers, amongst others. Now, let's imagine that the helicopter lifts up even higher. And let's say that, for instance, now that helicopter is really high in the sky and is not looking at just one industry, but many different industries. In fact, it's looking at the whole country, for instance. Now we are in a macro environmental situation in which I'm looking at very large factors that may or may not affect certain industries, but generally speaking, will affect everybody in one way or another. Those macroeconomic factors, of course, there's a list of those, of course, just as in the other two. And that third model is called the Pestel model. That Pestel model gives us the list of all the factors that can be an opportunity or a threat within that realm. And so, of course, you can see that here in that PowerPoint. So let's jump in and take a look at our very first one. We are going to do some introspection. So this is, you're looking at the mirror and you're looking just at your company. So the helicopter is just lifting off and it's just looking at that, at your business. We're looking at that organization. So that model is called the value chain. Now that value chain is a very, very common model, and it allows us to identify, in this case, strength and weaknesses, not the opportunities and threats. So strength and weaknesses, by definition, are elements that are internal and controllable to the business. And of course, when we look at those strengths and weaknesses, to make sure, especially for the people in the marketing function, that we are able to bring our A game and assist through the marketing function, the company in the realization of its company mission, and of course, its vision. So we are only looking at the strengths and weaknesses. So there's many examples of companies that have had to do this introspection and then taken a look at making some dramatic changes in their company. One such example is Dove. Dove is a global manufacturer. Of course, Dove belongs to Unilever, a big producer of consumer goods. And the folks at Dove realized that a few years ago, about 10 years ago, their sales were dwindling, which was kind of surprising because Dove is a very well-established company. So they did some market research, something that we'll discuss at the end of this chapter, and they found that the women, the younger women in their 20s, were no longer using this product or using it less because they identified the product as an older brand. In fact, they identified it as their mother's brand. Women in their 20s do not necessarily want to be associated with an older brand or the products that their mother uses. So, of course, you can understand that if the problem for Dove was that their brand was seen as an older product, they had to rejuvenate this product, make it younger. Then the question is how, right? So the objective is to make it younger, but then the question is how. And what Dove did in a very innovative approach is they decided to hone in on those issues that were important to women in their 20s. And so one of those issues was, which really touch values, which of course is a very dangerous thing to play with because it can go either way. But in this case, it was successful. The challenge here for Dove was to identify which of those values were really pertinent for those women in their 20s. And the one that was the most offensive to women was the way that women were portrayed in advertising, and how we portray women in a way that is physically truly unattainable to most women through photoshopping and what have you. And so Dove decided to position itself in the minds of consumers as the brand that is very sensitive to that issue. And of course, by default, of course, kind of point the finger implicitly at all the other companies that were not sensitive to this issue. It was a very successful campaign. And through a series of advertising, whether they be advertising billboards, digital marketing, or TV ads and radio ads as well, they were able to provide a special insight into the way women see themselves, many times because of the efforts of for instance, clothing companies or health and beauty companies, which tend to project this unattainable image. So one such video, which I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to just share my screen just to make sure that this is you can see it properly. There's going to be one quick second. Is this little video called Peekaboo? And let me just jump right in there. Long. So here we go. Increase that. And so let's take a look at this one video. And I think you'll understand and how they were able to really dive deep into consumer behavior and perceptions and align themselves with these values.
In the corner, looking kind of, don't you try to hide, you know. Peekaboo, peekaboo, I see you. Peekaboo, I'll kiss you, keep you out of mischief, make you blue, silly to be sure that you know. Peekaboo, peekaboo, I miss you. Peekaboo, I love you. Better make your mind up that you love me too, 'cause you're gonna make me, you know.
When did you stop thinking you were beautiful?
Peekaboo, I love you.
Okay, so whoops, let's just put an end to that. So what a great example here of an ad. They did a series of these ads, of course, and through this effort, they were able to really touch people's strong-held beliefs about the way women should be represented in advertising, position themselves as the friend of these women, and throughout that effort, of course, rejuvenate the brand, which of course was the absolute objective behind this. So let me go back and share our PowerPoints. Just a quick second. Here we go. And let's put this back into presentation mode. There we go. And there we go. Wonderful. Okay, so in continuing and taking a look at those internal environmental factors, those that provide strength and weaknesses. By the way, of course, with Dove, we had seen that the product, of course, and of course, this will be their second point, the current offer. We had seen that Dove had identified that this was a weakness of the company, but throughout, because they had their core competency, these human resources, their capacity to do market research, their capacity to develop interesting, innovative, and truly heartfelt advertising campaigns. These are strengths. Now, of course, you'll realize that some companies are not able to identify those problems, which make them, of course, a weakness for the company. It's not to say that they can't correct them, but we will identify those first. So resources and core competencies, very important. What the company does right now and how we measure those, what they've done in the past, a relationship with their business partners, and of course, key factors for success. So I've got some examples in the next PowerPoint, so I'll just jump into that example. One quick second. There we go. Okay, so a couple of examples of those components of the internal environment. So core competencies, it's what you do absolutely best. So companies, for instance, one good example of that is how Walmart and Procter & Gamble are integrated one into the other in a sense, even though they're separate companies, in terms of managing the products on the shelf. Many of us have been confronted, especially with COVID over the years, in being confronted to empty shelves in supermarkets and stores. This doesn't happen very often in Walmart, if ever. Why? Because Procter & Gamble is embedded into Walmart and is able to determine when they will have to ship products to Walmart to make sure that there is no empty shelves. Through the integration, digital integration, but also through their distribution network and just-in-time delivery, Walmart is able to provide a store experience which is superior because of these core competencies. Current offers is one in which the company will identify through key performance indicators whether a product is working or not. And one such decision, which was a true weakness for the company, eventually they did correct it. Classic example of that is when Coke back in the 1980s had decided to relaunch New Coke. Now, of course, they quickly discovered that there was a very strong pushback at reinventing the taste of Coke. At the time, it was reported that Coke was getting 10,000 phone calls a day to complain about this launch of this new product, this new version of Coke, which in the end had them bring back the old Coke, which is still in production right now. Companies, of course, will analyze their internal environment through a more in-depth market research to determine whether there's some sort of a trend in their sales, a downward trend. So these are more detailed analysis of what's going on. We'll look, of course, at key partners in our distribution network as well. And one such example of that, of course, is how Pepsi is able to develop relationships with bottling companies throughout the world, and how those bottling companies and those marketing companies, those consumer good companies are able to develop relationships with Pepsi as well. In Kuwait, for instance, the United Beverage Company, which has been around, I believe, since 1955, distributes Pepsi products throughout the country, of course and of course beyond Kuwait as well. Developing relationships with your suppliers and distribution networks and partners provides you a tremendous opportunity to grow your business past your immediate boundaries. But developing those relationships is difficult. Gaining the trust of the people within those organizations is complicated, and maintaining those relationships sometimes is just as hard as developing them initially. But if you can, it's a strength. If you cannot, you've guessed it, it's a weakness. Not one that necessarily cannot be corrected, but definitely one has to be identified. And the last is the key factors of failure or success. Now, of course, this depends on the industry in which you operate. So innovation might be a tremendous pressure on your organization. Another example of that might be just your capacity to develop strong social media presence. And this is not given to all organizations. If you don't have an Instagram page, a TikTok page, if you're not present on Facebook, and if you're not fueling that information on a regular basis, of course, it's a weakness. Otherwise, it's a strength. If you don't have a website which is a strongly performing website in which somebody can find the information very quickly, it's a weakness. Of course, on the other side of the coin, it can be a strength. So these are different kind of components of the internal environment, which kind of point to what those strengths and weaknesses are. Now, the full checklist of all the factors that we can identify as a strength or weakness is provided to us by a model that's called the value chain. Now, this value chain identifies, as you can see on the left, support activities such as company infrastructure, human resources, technology, and purchase and supplies. For instance, you might have a very good team of lawyers in your company. Now, or you might have access to lawyers outside of your company, because of this value chain just provides the list of all the elements that can provide strengths and weaknesses. You don't necessarily have to be the one actually doing it. For instance, you might have an external lawyer, a legal firm taking care of your legal matters. You might have an external accounting firm taking care. The issue is, do you actually have these people to support your operations? And of course, the question is then, how is that a strength? Well, if you have lawyers, of course, you're more likely to be able to identify threats in the marketplace. You might be able to better defend yourself against intellectual property theft, for instance, or against other issues related to your company. Of course, it might provide you the insight to say, well, if I've innovated a product, should I patent this product? Maybe the lawyers will tell you, by the time you finish with the patenting process, somebody's actually reverse engineered this and actually launched it into the marketplace. So this kind of advice is truly very important for companies to have to make decisions. Now, the question is, do you have them? If you do, it's a strength. If you don't, it's a weakness. Having human resources, having the right people in the right place. If you're selling to an international clientele, do you have people that speak multiple languages? Are they sensitive to cultural differences? Do they understand inferences, for instance? And of course, we'll talk about these other issues as well. Now, the main activities are at the bottom: internal logistics, your capacity to, of course, take the orders, operations, the capacity to deliver those orders, distribution, to have those products present where it's necessary. And of course, that's, the purple one is marketing sales. So being able to identify the right need of those customers and develop the right product at the right price and develop the right shopping experience. And of course, provide that after sales experience, which we will see is sometimes what will give in a peripheral way the true competitive advantage to a company which otherwise sells products that are very similar to other ones. And all of this, of course, we call value because it provides value for consumers, right? And of course, if we've done our job right, we've captured value in exchange through those margins, which provide the profits in keeping our business alive. So this provides the list. Now, if you have any doubt as to whether this model exists in nature, why don't you just go onto Google right now, put in the words value chain into Google, and choose your favorite company. So whether that be a restaurant or whether that would be a hotel chain, for instance, and go into Google Images, and you will see something that looks exactly like this as a model of analysis. We use it all the time, and it's great because it gives us that list of all the things that we do right and we do wrong. So a couple of examples of that. For instance, Ritz-Carlton. Ritz-Carlton provides a tremendous opportunity, a tremendous experience for their customers, and it may not impress you to know that Ritz-Carlton has about a 3 or 4% market share in North America, but it may impress you that they have about an 85% market share in the ultra luxurious segment of the marketplace. Now, the question is, how do they do that? What do they do so well? Well, they do a number of things very well. They have great locations, very central locations, and they hire the best people and they provide a great experience, but they also give every single member of that company $2,500 discretionary budget to solve the problems of their customers without having to consult their superior. This is everybody from the lowest employee in that pyramid to all the way to the top. And providing that customer experience by solving their problems quickly is what gives Ritz-Carlton their competitive advantage. Think about other companies in which the employees have no decision-making ability. This is clearly a weakness. If you hire people, why don't you trust those people, right? So this may be something we should question ourselves about. Walmart's capacity to deliver and to have those products on the shelves on a continuous basis, it provides it with strength. The opposite might be true. In fact, here in Canada, we had a company called Target. They were here for not very long, and one of the problems that they had is that those shelves were bare. And they were bare because they had procurement and logistical nightmare, which of course was very hard for them to turn around, and they ended up leaving the country. The capacity to manufacture products in a quality product. Now, I don't know if a Louis Vuitton bag is worth $3,000, but I can tell you that it is designed almost with a medieval quality. They test the zipper about 500 times. It is a very very good product. So the capacity to deliver a great product, of course, provides a great advantage. And of course, Amazon being able to, through its algorithm, to almost guess what you're going to order ahead of time, which I'm sure we're getting to through AI, gives Amazon the competitive advantage and dominance in the marketplace that others don't. Of course, providing a great customer experience through whether that be installation or repair or just measuring and providing a great satisfactory and experience is something that Walt Disney does better than most. Whether they be adults or kids, people go to the land of the imaginary, just as some adults would go to Las Vegas. And in some cases, just the experience provides that competitive advantage. Walt Disney is absolutely not the only amusement park there, but they do something that other companies are just not able to do, which gives them their competitive advantages. L'Oréal is a company that does very well in hiring top talent, and they are very good at holding on to that top talent by providing them a walk through the hierarchy through promotions. When a company doesn't provide that, that is, of course, a weakness. H&M is able to, through their market research, identify trends in the marketplace and deliver clothes to satisfy those trends faster than virtually anybody else. Now, we may call it fast fashion, and of course there are ethical issues related to us, but from strictly a sales perspective, the capacity to deliver those products, to develop products and to deliver them to customers before anybody else is a strength for one, and of course, you guessed it, a weakness for others. So this is all the value chain examples. Now, another minor model within this, which is kind of like a fourth model, but it's within the strength and weaknesses list. These are internal and controllable, is something that we call benchmarking, which is really just measuring yourself against the best practices in an industry, in one industry, and perhaps even another. And so one such example of that is, some of you may know, that in the United States, as with other countries, there are private hospitals, and those private hospitals serve for instance, sometimes elective surgery. So, a cosmetic surgery, which is not necessary for many people, but for whatever reason, this is something that they partake in. Now, people who partake in this kind of surgery are sometimes wealthy people, and these wealthy people have some expectations in terms of the accommodations that they expect to have in that hospital room. And so hospitals not only look at other hospitals to see what kind of setup you might have in the hospital room, but they'll actually look at hotels, because the people who come to a hospital for a few days and to rest up from elective surgery have the same expectations from the hospital that they would have from a hotel. So benchmarking is looking at your competitors, so other hospitals, to see how they've set it up, and through hotels. So you can see that the room in the hotel is on the left and the room in the hospital is on the right, to make sure that that experience is the best that a customer can expect. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at all of the factors that contribute to creating strength and weaknesses for a company, these are internal and controllable. Let's now look at the external environment in which the company basks, to find out those elements that will provide us the list of opportunities and threats. Now, here we have two models, two submodels that give us that list. The first one is the Porter's Five Forces model, and this Porter Five Forces model identifies issues that are in what we call the micro environment. Why micro? Because it's close to us. It's elements that are within our industry. So if you are a car manufacturer, the analysis won't be this, the model will be the same, but of course the elements within that model that we'll look at will not be the same as, for instance, a computer manufacturer. And then we'll take a look at the macro environmental, which is much larger. And of course, that is our Pestel model. So let's take a look at now back to our little box from the start. And now let's take our helicopter, which was, as you remember, for the value chain, looking only at our strengths and weaknesses. Let's have that helicopter go up a little bit higher and look at our industry now. And for that, we are now in this blue zone in our micro environment, very much like in our last PowerPoint, or the previous PowerPoint. And we're going to take a look at Porter's Five Forces. So before we jump into Porter's Five Forces, I'd like to just mention, which of course it's one of the elements of Porter Five Forces, which is to look at our competitors. So we can actually start with our competitors. And it's important to understand that not all competitors are created equal. I understand that many of you will automatically go to, well, we have small competitors, we have big competitors, or in some instances, we might have many competitors or very few competitors. But the issue here is my competitor a direct competitor or an indirect competitor? So a direct competitor, of course, would be a company that offers the exact same service as I do. So for instance, in Europe, EasyJet and Ryanair are direct competitors. Now, if I am an airline and I stop at this analysis and I only look at airlines, well, I might be making a mistake, because I might not be looking. I think to myself, well, okay, if I'm EasyJet, I can see where Ryanair would be a threat. If I'm Ryanair, I can see where EasyJet would be a threat based on pricing and where they fly out of and the customer service and all the other elements. But what I'm missing out on is what my consumers think. And the question then is, of course, if I'm in, for instance, Belgium, and I want to go to France, is the customer truly asking for a flight to go from Brussels to Paris, or does the consumer just want to go from Brussels to Paris? Because if their need is just to go from Brussels to Paris, there are other ways to get there. You can take a bus, of course, you can drive, and you can take, of course, a train. And so it's very important, moving on to the right part of your PowerPoint, to take a look at our competitors from this indirect perspective, to extend the competitive analysis from the direct to the indirect, because that is the way our customers are thinking. And I may just find out that my indirect competitors, for instance, the train, are providing certain experiences which enhance their offer and might bring my customers to leave my service and go towards that. It might also give me inspiration to improve my offering. Okay, so very, very important to consider direct competitors and indirect competitors, if for no other reason, and that's the way your customers are thinking. So Porter's 5 forces are 5 factors that we will analyze to identify the elements, I remind you, in the microenvironment, things that are industry, which provide opportunities and threats. We're no longer in the strengths and weaknesses. These are external and uncontrollable factors. Now, right at the center, the rivalry between competitors we just covered. And the other elements are threat of new entrants, bargaining power of our buyers, threats of substitute products, and bargaining power of suppliers. Now, how in the world do these issues provide threats? Well, you have a list of them over here. So the threat of new entrants into the marketplace, the question is, if I'm in an industry, well, how easy is it for competitors, for anybody for that matter, to come into my industry? Is it porous? That is to say, is it easy to come into? Or are there barriers that prevent companies from actually coming in? So one example that's been given for many, many years by professors is the car manufacturing industry. So there for many, many years, in fact, for decades, it was very difficult to become a car manufacturer. So if you were Chrysler or Ford, or if you were Fiat or one of these large manufacturers, there's very few chances that somebody would come and be able to enter that market. And I think you can guess why. The capital required to build those manufacturing facilities, the economies of scale, just the expertise, and of course the brand name, right? So these are very strong brand names, and you're coming in with a completely unknown product. And of course, I think many of you have already guessed who ruined that example for all the professors on the planet. Yes, we can all thank Elon Musk for that. He's not the only one. We have many other companies now that have joined the fray, between Rivian and Fisker, amongst others. In time, maybe some of these companies may disappear. But we now have situations where there is a much larger threat of new entrants. And of course, BYD and VinFast from Vietnam have now, those car manufacturers have proven that suddenly there is a new threat coming in. Bargaining power of customers is where our own clients have power over us. Now, this is oftentimes in a business-to-business case example, and I'm going to provide an example in the next PowerPoint. So the question is, when our customers are buying, can they just tell us from one minute to the next that, well, you know, that we as manufacturers have to lower our price or they'll stop buying from us? So how much power do they have over us? Bargaining power of suppliers at the other end. So how much power do our own suppliers have over us? So can they just increase the price of the products, the base products that we need to build our computers, for instance? So if I'm buying my screens from Sanyo, if I'm buying them from Toshiba, and I'm a computer manufacturer, how much power do my suppliers have over me? And then, of course, from my buyer's perspective, from the consumers, how easy is for them to exchange my product to another? How easy is for them to leave and just say, well, I'm not buying your product anymore. I'll just substitute it for another product that does just as well. So let's take a look at an example of that in this PowerPoint here. Let me just grab a little bit of water. So I'm providing an example here of several different examples in several different industries. just to make sure that everybody understands my example. But I just want to point out that if I was to do a true Porter's competitive forces analysis, I would not have a telecommunication company and a retail store like Walmart and a gaming company such as Nintendo and a chip manufacturer such as Intel. I would have all of the companies within the same industry, so all telecom or all retail or all video games. But I'm providing different examples just to make sure that I reach all of you and that you all understand the example. So the threat of new entrants right now in Canada and the United States, it's very difficult for companies to enter the telecommunication fray. Why? There's a barrier. That barrier is provided by the governments. For instance, Huawei is finding it very, very difficult to develop their 5G network in North America. In fact, they're having the same problems in Europe. The governments feel that perhaps Huawei's approach is still lacking in ways of security and data breach. And for that reason, the companies that are within that industry are not confronted with a very, very large threat from Huawei. Now, that's not to say that when Huawei looks at this and they see the same thing, they say, well, we're having a little problem getting in here. Doesn't mean that Huawei cannot find a way around that. In fact, Huawei may not be able to develop their 5G network, but they are one of the largest providers of cell phones, and maybe just getting their foot in the door there will eventually be able to, eventually be able to successfully lobby governments to develop the 5G networks as well. Bargaining power of consumers, in this case, in a B2B example, a great example of that is Walmart and Rubbermaid. So you have the example at the bottom of the screen. So Rubbermaid was a very large company that was very successful for many years. Rubbermaid is an American company, sold their garbage cans, these rubber garbage cans that you would pull out to the street with wheels, very convenient, as opposed to just the aluminum cans back in the day. So very successful. They would sell their products through a series of, I believe, thousands of little home hardware stores. This is a chain of hardware stores in North America. And they had very good relationships with many, many independent hardware stores and some chains. But they saw, of course, Walmart emerging as a dominant player in the marketplace and slowly started shifting most of their production to be sold through Walmart locations, to the point where Walmart was by far their biggest client. Now, at one point, this is a completely true story, at one point, Rubbermaid was confronted with an increase in the price of resin. So resin is a component of plastic, and of course, plastic is a component of these garbage cans. So having this increase of price cut down Rubbermaid's margins. And so they approached Walmart to discuss this issue and mentioned that they were going to have to increase the price of their products to Walmart to cover the cost of this product, to cover the cost, excuse me, of this increase of their base components. Now, of course, I'm sure that many of you would guess that Walmart was well aware of the increase of the cost of resin. And despite the fact that they were well aware that this was not something that Rubbermaid controlled, it was an external factor, Walmart refused the increase and mentioned to Rubbermaid that this was more a Rubbermaid problem than a Walmart problem. Rubbermaid insisted, and so did Walmart. And it was pretty clear that Walmart was not going to accept that price increase. All of this is detailed and referenced through a PBS a Frontline program that you can see on YouTube, by the way. Well, despite this, Rubbermaid did increase the price to Walmart. And Rubbermaid discovered what the bargaining power of their consumers, in this case Walmart, truly meant. Walmart, in response to this increase, removed some of the biggest selling products of Rubbermaid from their stores for several years. And this, and combined with some other lax management approach from Rubbermaid, led Rubbermaid into bankruptcy. That's right, bankruptcy. This is not to say that this is Walmart's fault, but it does point out the fact that Rubbermaid's decision to centralize all of their sales, or most of their sales, to one retailer put them in a situation where the balance of power had shifted to that retailer. Now, could Rubbermaid have done otherwise? Of course, once they finish this analysis, and of course we're not there yet, we'll be there later on in the semester, but Rubbermaid, of course, I think you can guess, should find different buyers and open up different markets and be less dependent on this buyer, and therefore reducing the bargaining power of consumers. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have bargaining power of suppliers. Now, if you are manufacturing cars, or if you're manufacturing computers, or virtually any kind of electronic devices, you need chips, of course, within those products. And right now, there are only about 3 global manufacturers of chips. And if you need those chips, who do you think has the most power within that relationship? Well, you've guessed it, the chip manufacturers. And if they increase the price of those chips, you may not have a choice to accept. If they decide to reduce your terms of payment and ask you to pay faster, you might have to say, yes, we will, right away. So you can see where the suppliers might have a very strong bargaining power over you. China, for instance, has what we call rare earth. This is a series of different kind of components of minerals that are used to manufacture screens. If they decide to stop selling those minerals to countries, as they have to Japan, or threaten to cut off the supply, the price, of course, of those minerals that are taken from somewhere else in the world might increase dramatically, and would be, of course, a tremendous threat to the manufacturer of companies that need those components to manufacture screens. Now, are there ways, once we've analyzed this, to lower the threat of suppliers? Of course there are. Of course, one can guess is to try to find different suppliers. Now, in the case of chips, some of you might say, well, this is a little bit of a problem because there are only 3. Well, some of you might have a Microsoft computer. Well, Microsoft, faced with this threat of perhaps a dwindling supply, or having too much of this power within the hands of their chip suppliers, have decided to manufacture, you've guessed it, their own chips, which of course they've integrated into some of their Surface computers. So there's a way around that. Those are strategic decisions we take later, but this analysis provides us, of course, the thinking going forward. And of course, as I mentioned, the industry rivalry is very important to consider. One such example, which was a great one, I think, is a company called Virgin. As you know, Richard Branson owns Virgin Atlantic and what have you. Richard Branson decided to launch a Virgin Cola in the United States a few years ago. He reserved Fifth Avenue. If you put in Virgin Cola into Google, you'll see an image of him on a tank. He reserved Fifth Avenue. They put thousands of cans onto Fifth Avenue, and he's in a tank rolling over those cans, which are Coke cans. Coke cans are flying all over the place, marking the arrival of Virgin Cola into the marketplace. Well, maybe Richard Branson should have done a stronger Porter's competitive forces analysis, because he would have discovered what inevitably would happen, which is that Coke and Pepsi and other, mainly those 2 manufacturers, bottlers, control most of the marketplace. And it was very difficult for Virgin Cola to actually be provided shelf space, because those shelving fees that these companies will pay to have shelves, made it that Virgin Cola just could not get their product into the marketplace. And this is beyond the fact that, of course, the economies of scale, which Coca-Cola has, allows Coke to just, they can reduce their prices, which of course is of their purview. It's their right to do so. But of course, this of course makes it very, very difficult for Virgin Cola to develop the market. And of course, it just didn't work. So these are the 5 forces of Porter, all of which are external, all of which are uncontrollable. But of course, as you can see through my many examples, cannot be ignored, because it just might lead some companies to failure. So this is the microenvironment. And to close out our external environment analysis, let's now look at the macro environment. So this is much larger. So let's jump into this PASTEL model, which looks at political, economic, social, cultural, technological, ecological, or natural, as the author of our book refers to, or legal factors that are external and uncontrollable, but that we cannot ignore. So you've guessed it, our helicopter now is much higher up, is looking more at a country level, and is looking at all sorts of factors which affect not only us, but might affect other industries. And we will look at this through a model that is called the Pestel model, which of course you just saw. P for political, E for economic, S for social, T for technological, E for environmental, and L for legal factors, which will give us the list of all the external and uncontrollable factors that we cannot ignore. Many of them are trends in the marketplace. Here you are, government decisions, factors related to economic circumstances such as inflation, interest rates, and what have you, demographics for social culture and changing social norms, technological issues, environmental issues, which of course I think many of us are well aware of, and of course legal issues. So let's take a quick look at what those might be. A couple of different examples of those. So within North America, as with many other countries, we have what we call the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, these agreements between Mexico, Canada, and United States allow for a freer, not a free, but a freer flow of merchandise going back and forth. Now, this is a tremendous opportunity, for instance, for Canada to be able to export, that is to send products to the United States without being confronted with what we call barriers. Now, this is not an international marketing class, but one could well imagine that countries tend to want to protect their own manufacturing facilities and therefore put up resistance to products that are coming into their country. But of course, if they do that, then we are more likely to do that towards their country as well. So for Canadians, the fact that these barriers have been reduced is a tremendous opportunity for us to go into those countries. So it provides an opportunity for all Canadian exporters. Of course, that very same issue, which is an opportunity for us, is a threat for the Americans because we are now coming into their country and competing with them. And again, it is also a threat for us in Canada for the American products that are coming in. But this is something that we accept through free trade agreements. If you look at a few years ago, the Brexit, in which Great Britain left the European Union, now this was a political decision which was a tremendous benefit to British companies that sell only to the British. But of course, it was a heavy weight for European companies that sell to the British, because now suddenly these kind of agreements between countries had disappeared, and it's much harder for European countries now to ship products to Great Britain. It's not impossible, but it's just harder, and there are more taxes and tariffs, for instance, on those products. So, and of course, reciprocally, one could well imagine that if Great Britain makes it harder for European products to come into Great Britain, well, Europeans are making it harder for Great Britain, for British products to get into the European Union. So these are political decisions which are out of our control, but do affect decisions that we take. Now, what can we do about that? We will definitely take a look at that in strategic decisions later on. Let's just now understand the world in which we are. So economic factors are other external and uncontrollable factors which come from our macro environment. Economic factors which, for instance, consumer confidence, interest rates that have now gone up fairly substantially over the years and may come down eventually. Those interest rates make it harder for consumers to buy products. Many consumers buy the product on credit. That credit is now more tightened, which means that they have less credit, which means they can buy less products. And the products that they do buy on credit cost them more money. So all of these factors, for instance, inflation, recession, unemployment, and of course, customer confidence and interest rate will affect purchasing power and people's willingness to purchase products. And therefore, it is a threat to most companies. Now, is there something that we can do about that? And again, we'll discuss that later on in the semester. But one such example is lately many food retailers here in Canada, United States, in Europe, and for instance, Carrefour, have really introduced many non-branded products or branded by their own brand. So here in Canada, Metro brand products, or for instance, in the United States, Publix or Winn-Dixie or Wegmans, Carrefour or Sainsbury have their own branded products. And they're pushing these products because in economic circumstances where people have less money or are less willing to spend money because they're not sure of what's going, these economic factors that are making them feel insecure. These food producers and manufacturers have to find a way to lower their prices to compensate for this purchasing power which has been affected. And it's hard to do that with branded products. They have they don't have that much control over what Procter & Gamble and Coke and what have you might want to do. So we find now an introduction of these products into the marketplace to compensate for these external factors. So they are uncontrollable, they are external, but once we finished analyzing, then the question is, what do we do? And here's one example of one such thing. Now, the third one, social factors, are elements related to, of course, human beings. Now, those social factors, there are many different ones, of course, and one of the classic ones is demographics, is the measure of demographics. Now, what you can see here on the left-hand side, and in many countries, what we are observing is an aging population. Now, that aging population, what you're seeing here in Canada, it's going back from 2017, but it goes through the next few years, so we can see what's going on these years. On the left is men, on the right is women. So left is red in men and blue is women. And what you are seeing is that in 2017, there was a larger proportion of people within the 20 to 30 range. And over the course of the next 20 years, you see the weighted value, the weight of the 60-year-olds taking on a much larger proportion. So we have a very aging population here in Canada. They also have a very aging population in Japan. It is said that in about 50 years, there's going to be about 20–30% fewer people in Japan. You can see the aging population in China as well. This is very much the product of the one-child policy that China adopted for many decades to reduce, of course, the number of people in the country. But of course, now you actually have a decrease or a very small increase in the population, so a very aging population. Ironically, you don't have that in India. You have a very young population. Now, these are external and external factors, but the question is, well, okay, so how is this an opportunity or a threat? Well, if you are selling diapers for babies, such as Pampers, I would dare to say that an aging population is not necessarily a good thing. So this is a threat to all manufacturers of baby diapers. And we'll see how, of course, those companies might be able to do something to compensate for that. Another social factor, of course, is the movement of people. So we have a lot of people leaving the rural environment and moving to very urban areas. This is an opportunity, of course, for businesses that operate within cities. And of course, it's a threat otherwise. And what you can see here is the variation in this PowerPoint of the 20 most populous megacities over the course of the next 80 years. And what you're observing is that some of the biggest, mostly densely populated cities are moving from North America in 2010, New York, Los Angeles, Mexico, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, and moving more to Asia and to Africa. So this kind of trend is external and uncontrollable, but provides opportunities or threats, depending on which industry you're in. Since we're talking about people, of course, the variation or the change in values and in the way people see themselves and how they see their relationship with the planet and companies is something that companies cannot ignore. Not only in the marketing of their products, but how they express the mission and the vision of the company as well, because that's what people rally to. So we can see that consumers, human beings, are much more sensitive to the planet, to the availability of water, to renewable energy, of course, to sustainability. And one such example of a company that is taking that analysis and adapting it to its own offering is a Swedish company called Polarn och Perry, which has recently stopped manufacturing raincoats and rain boots made out of rubber to display to their customers that they have understood this trend in the marketplace, and they will respect this need of those customers to be more sensitive to issues within to issues of sustainability. Another social change, of course, and this has been an accelerator through COVID, is people's working from home. So many people just go into the office now, maybe 1 or 2 days a week or 3 days a week, or none at all. So the capacity now of companies to adapt to this, or lack of to not adapt, is a strength or a weakness, but it is the product of an analysis of those external factors, which are very, very strong trends. So some companies, of course, who will be able to adapt to this will grow, and companies that won't may just not be there to see what happens. So the fourth part of the pestle analysis is technological factors. So this is an interesting one, and we've seen over the course of the last year how technology has really blossomed and exploded. And I'm not just talking about the internet. I mean, just this interaction that we are having was not possible 10, 15 years ago. So streaming would not provide this kind of technological background. So what you're seeing here, of course, is the advent of technology and the use of, for instance, cell phones. So of course, when it's yellow in North America, of course, it's red in Europe because people are sleeping. And when it's yellow in Europe, it's red in North America because they are sleeping. So you can see the strong usage of telecommunications, particularly cell phones in this. Now, this is not the case everywhere else. So you can see in Africa and many parts of Russia and East Asia that the technology has not quite gotten there yet. So the question is it because that people are not really willing to adopt this technology quite yet? So that would be more of a social thing. Or is it just because the technology has not been adapted yet? Now, throughout the use of tools such as, of course, Teams and Zoom and many other technologies, we've seen this evolution, of course, as an opportunity for many companies and a threat to other ones. And we'll give us an example in a second. But let's now say one thing which is undeniable, that if you were to compare all the elements of the pestle, political, economic, social, technological, environment or natural, and legal, the most dangerous one is technology. Can you guess why? Well, perhaps some of you may have guessed that it happens faster than anything else. Social change takes a long time. One can easily imagine that politicians also take a long time to make decisions sometimes, but technology tends to sneak up on them. So it could be a very strong threat to certain companies. And one such example, of course, is Netflix. Now, some of you may not remember how Netflix was actually born. Netflix was nothing more than a company that was solving a very simple problem for folks that would rent out movies. So one of the issues in renting out movies was that we had a limited supply within the store. And even though Blockbuster, a big supermarket chain, a big video store chain in North America, with about 7,000 locations at fairly large stores, it's not limitless amount of videos. So Netflix was able to provide a much larger selection of videos, sometimes some antiquated, some older movies. And it also solved another issue that people had, which is that they needed sometimes more time to watch the movie. So you would go online, you would order the movie, Netflix would mail you an actual DVD, for those of you who remember what a DVD is, and you would have 30 days to watch it, and then they would actually provide you an envelope to send it back to them within 30 days. So it was a very convenient kind of service. Now, one could somehow maybe not even blame Blockbuster for not seeing what would happen in a very short period of time. Within about 10 years of having sold, Wayne Huizenga, who sold Blockbuster 10 or 15 years after having sold it for billions of dollars, Blockbuster was bankrupt. Why? Because it underestimated the growth of Netflix, but it mainly underestimated the technological change that allowed Netflix to go from a DVD mailing company to a streaming service, which, of course, many of you have guessed was 3G, 4G networks. So the advance and the advent of this technological change was an opportunity, of course, for some players, Netflix, and of course, a threat to those which had ignored looking a little bit further down the line. The ecological or environmental or natural, depending on how you'd like to look at that, factors are also an opportunity or a threat depending on which industry you're in. The picture on the left is the projection for the Florida, United States coast in approximately about 100 years. So if you are down here where I like to vacation sometimes in Fort Lauderdale, well, that's going to be in the water. Perhaps it's time to buy some land around Orlando, which is in the center of Florida, because that's going to be oceanside pretty soon. So one can easily imagine that this is a threat to the state and a threat to installations and a threat to, of course, anybody that's in that flood zone. But of course, for companies that are able to adapt in other industries, it might provide an opportunity. COVID, of course, one could easily imagine that this is a global threat. And I certainly don't want to make light of this. Some of you may have lost family or friends, but the reality is that while this was a threat to most industries, it was also an opportunity for any companies that sold masks and other kinds of protection equipment. So your job in looking at this analysis is to identify the factors which are an opportunities and threats, and of course, decide how much of an opportunity or threat it is, for instance, for your business. And then finally, the last one are legal factors. So these are decisions that, unlike political decisions, they're legal factors. These are laws on the books, of course, which can provide opportunities or threats depending on where you are, of course, because laws change from one country to another. And the enforcement of those laws, of course, are also an opportunity or threat. So for instance, in the United States, you have for every, I believe it's every 1,000 people, you have approximately, I believe it's about 34 or 35 lawyers for every 1,000 individuals living in the United States. In Japan, it's approximately 2. So very litigious environment in the United States, not so much in Japan, much more in the collaboration negotiation. You might look at other legal factors, for instance, and this is the one I provided here, but there are many, many other ones. For instance, to what extent are intellectual property rights protected in certain countries, and to which point are they very porous? This is an opportunity or a threat. I would dare say it's more of a threat, especially if you have decided to play on the international scene. So to what extent is it possible for companies within another country to copy my invention and to launch that in the marketplace? Inventions that might have cost me a fortune. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to share this link to you. You're going to see it's kind of an interactive map. So let me just stop sharing that for one quick second. And let me open up this map here. There we go. Okay, so if you click through this link, what you're going to find is the Property Rights Alliance 2023 Property Right Index. And so what you can do is, it's very interactive, right? So you can just click on this. So for instance, I was talking about the United States. So if you go to the United States, what you're going to see here is on a scale of 1 to 10. I mean, they're pretty strong in terms of property rights protection. A little bit lower recently, and they're still considered number 1. And then you could, of course, compare that, for instance, to another country. So let's go ahead and compare that, let's say, for the sake of argument, to, let's say, Argentina. Okay? So global ranking for Argentina, for instance, is 95th out of 125 and dropping. Okay? Score of 4.2. So, and of course, you've got some more qualitative descriptions here. And then you could see to what extent, okay, through this spider's web a little bit, of to what extent Argentina controls corruption, to what extent they have patent protection, to what point they have legal protection. So a very, very interesting interactive map telling you a little bit that perhaps this country, it's not to say that you won't go into this country, but it may just tell you that once you're going into that country, you may find that your protection within that country is not as good, of course, and is potentially a threat. Okay, so legal decisions that, of course, might affect your company. So let me go back to sharing our PowerPoint. It won't be long. Here we go. go. And we'll put this in our presentation mode. Et voilà. Okay, so we're back to our legal. So we have now looked at all of the factors that are strengths and weaknesses. So I remind you that if you were to make a list of all the strengths and weaknesses, there's a model for that, and it's called, you guessed it, the value chain. This provides the list of all the factors that are strengths and weaknesses. And you're going to see that we're going to be discussing this at length throughout the semester. And for those factors that are external and uncontrollable, unlike the strengths and weaknesses, which are internal and controllable. So the external and uncontrollable come from two models, which one of them is called the Porter's 5 forces, which come from the microenvironment, so closer to you, your industry. And then that helicopter that went all the way up and sees a very large image, which is the macro-environmental factors, which are provided from the PESTEL, so political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. Now, to finish up this chapter, the question is, now we understand, okay, well, this is the information that I need, but where can I get this information? Well, we get this information through something that we call the marketing information system. So consider this like a vacuum cleaner of information. And so we start off, of course, with the manager's analysis of the marketplace. And if, of course, the managers have all the information, they can go ahead and start making decisions, strategic decisions and objectives, strategies and tactics to solve those issues. If they don't, they're going to need information. And now, in getting that information, the question is, do they actually already have that information somehow within their data bank or in their environment? Or do they have to actually get that information? And then we're going to take a look at that analysis and that research, which then will provide that data to make, of course, relevant, reliable, and valid decisions. So within the marketing information system, the very first thing that you would want to do is look at secondary data. So I want to point out right away that there are two big categories here of data or information search. The first one is looking for secondary data, and the second one is primary data. There are only two big categories. Now, the difference between secondary data, and we'll look that there's internal and external secondary data, but let's just go back to internal and, secondary and primary, those two big categories, secondary and primary. Secondary data, the only thing you have to remember is that secondary data exists. It's been written down somewhere. It's encapsulated somewhere. It's already been researched. Secondary data exists. Primary data is information that does not exist in the form that you need it to exist to make a good decision. Therefore, you have to go get it for the very first time. Secondary data exists, primary data doesn't. So let's concentrate on secondary data. So the very first of the two categories within secondary data is internal secondary data. So the question is, internal to whom? Well, some of you might have guessed, internal to the actual company. So the company many times has already accumulated data. So for instance, if you want to launch a strawberry, pineapple, kiwi yogurt that is organic and is very small proportions for individuals and is really designed for kids, now I'm making this up, so something very specific. The question is, has somebody in your company already done that research? Why go get that research if I've already got it? So I will look within my data bank to look if I have a report on this. Now that is internal secondary data. It's secondary because it exists, and it's internal to the company. Because of course now I might be able to act on it, or not. So for instance, somebody might have analyzed it and said, you know what, there's absolutely no demand for this, or we can't make money with it. Okay, great, let's move on. Now, other kind of data is encapsulated within your data bank as well. Scanner data. Once that information has been scanned, beep, beep, beep. Of course, that provides companies with binary data, which, of course, through AI, which allows us to data mine that information, can tell us why, that some products are selling and some products are not. It won't tell us why, but it'll tell us at least that they're selling or not. One good example of internal data that was used a few years ago was through the pharmacy that was in a Target, within Target's chain, which through the loyalty card that a customer was using. So a loyalty card as some of you may have. Every time you scan that loyalty card, it encapsulates the information about that customer's purchasing pattern and their preferences, for instance. And so Target was able to determine through the different products that the person had purchased, through creams and hydrating creams and vitamins and other kinds of supplements, that person was pregnant. And so Target took it upon itself to send out, this was an article, I believe, in the New York Times from a few years ago, send out a care package. So kind of a congratulations package with different kind of food products and creams and so on, with balloons. And they sent it out to this person who was pregnant. And they knocked on the door and with all the balloons and what have you, and the door opens up, and then of course the person says, on behalf of Target, congratulations for having a baby. Yay, we're having a baby! Isn't that wonderful? Of course, the parents of the pregnant 15-year-old were very surprised to find out that their daughter was pregnant, because of course she had not mentioned it to her parents yet. So, of course, one of the challenges with internal secondary data is that while it might provide you with great information to make decisions, you have, of course, a tremendous responsibility to protect that data and to use it in an ethical way. I think they sued the company. I'm not sure, but okay. So data breaches are common. Having said that, this information is very, very useful. Can be very useful. So the other aspect of secondary data is not internal, but external. So this is information that exists, but not within the company. And this is information that can exist through a whole host of different kind of sources. We call this marketing intelligence, but it is basically external secondary data. So newspaper articles, Google searches, reports that you might have, any kind of rigorous source of information external to the company, but that exists, is external secondary data. Now, if you click through the links here in our PowerPoint, you will access HEC's data bank of information. So many of the reports that you might find on the internet, and which might be expensive and provided to you by companies like Nielsen, are actually free through the library. So if you're doing market research, it's very interesting to use your student code, go through our library, because our library pays to have access to these data sets, these data banks, and it allows us to discover the quantity of products that are sold, and not only quantitative information, but oftentimes qualitative as to why things are being done. Other companies, such as I was mentioning, Nielsen, which of course you can click through here as well, are companies that are market research firms that collect all this information, package it, and then sell it to companies, knowing what companies are looking for. But of course, once this information exists, whether it's free or not, it exists, so it's secondary because it's not within the company, it's external data. Now, if you don't have all of this information, and you need information for a very specific mandate, you may have no choice but to do what we call marketing research. Now you are looking for, as I mentioned before, the other big category, primary data. So this is information that you are collecting for the very purpose of the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, in some cases, this might be your company doing this research internally, if you have a market research division, or you might entrust this to a market research firm. Marketing research can be very rigorous in terms of being able to be generalizing this information onto a population, so statistically reliable and valid, or it might just be to give us a little idea. So some of you have already been stopped on the street or in a shopping mall where people have asked you just, can you give your opinion on something? So these are not reports that might provide us large, major strategic decisions, but might provide us some level of insight. Either way, they are primary. It's primary data because it's being collected for the very first time. Okay, so marketing research is something that is oftentimes difficult, expensive, and may not provide you with the information that you're looking for. So of course, once you have a managerial question, you would always go to internal secondary data first, see if you have it. If you don't, you'll go to external secondary data, so information that is existing but not within the company. If you have no choice, you'll go to primary data to finally provide you that reliable and useful and actionable information which will allow you then to make strategic decisions. And of course, I have one big PowerPoint here, which kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the overview of secondary research on one side, information that exists, primary research that doesn't exist yet in that form. And you'll notice that there are three big categories: exploratory, descriptive, and causal research within primary research, which leads us really to one of our last PowerPoints. But let's keep in mind that once you are looking for information, it is very important to determine the reliability and the validity of this information. So the kind of questions we're going to ask is, of course, who was involved in collecting this? Are these scientists, or this is just somebody down the street? Why was this collected? So if it was collected for the purposes of a different kind of product launch, it may not be that useful for your decision. So who answered this? Were the customers who answered this the target customers that you are trying to develop the insight about? Or was it customers from another country or from another segment? May not make this information very useful for you. How old is this information? If you have information that's 10 years old, I mean, trends have changed dramatically in that time. And of course, COVID has been an accelerator for that. So of course, the information has to be fairly recent. How was it collected? As I mentioned, was it just a very informal approach, or did we really take a statistically significant sample out of the population that represents people within that overall population, and we can then expand the opinion of that small group onto everybody? This is oftentimes done to predict the results of an election, for instance. And of course, is this data consistent with other data? So we might not just want to go onto one source. So the data collection, of course, process is very important here. And we finish on this last PowerPoint, coming back to this issue of primary research. So this information you're looking for the very first time. Now, the question is, what approach shall I take? Shall it be exploratory, descriptive, or causal? And to understand these three different approaches is to understand where I stand with this information. Exploratory research is an approach that we will use if we don't quite understand what we're looking for. It's not clearly defined. Descriptive research, and I'll come back to that in a second. Descriptive research is if I understand what's important for customers, or if I understand at the very least what I'm trying to measure, I'm going to try to put a number on it, for instance. And causal research will tell me the interaction between variables. So it's going to measure that causal effect. And I'm going to give you an example of that as well. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that as a teacher, I find that my students are not particularly happy with my class. They're not, I measure the satisfaction of my students, and they say, well, the class is not so great. Of course, I hope that's not the case for this class, but let's just say in an imaginary world, okay? So I don't know why they're not happy. And since I don't know why, I'm not going to really specifically ask them about certain variables. I might just stand in front of the class and ask them in a very forthright and honest way, can you tell me what is important to you in a classroom? And so some students might say, well, the professor's capacity to give many examples, or the capacity of the professor to express his opinions clearly, or the professor's sensitivity to different cultures within the group. Or it might just be the comfort of your chairs, or the quality of the PowerPoints, or whether there's windows. There might be a whole host of things. And so I'm going to let people talk about this. And within that conversation, I might be able to put together certain factors that seem to be kind of important. So now I might want to say, okay, well, it seems that the PowerPoints and the way I express myself, and maybe the comfort of the room, or even the scheduling of the class, those are elements that are important. So now I might want to say, okay, these are elements that are important. Now let's see what the students think of me. And so I'll go into descriptive research. And this is actually something that many of you do at the end of a class. You'll evaluate the class with a survey. It's just one example. So then I'll say, okay, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, measure the comfort of the chairs. These chairs are very comfortable. And some of you will say, well, 3. Ooh, that means that they're not very comfortable. did the how dynamic was the professor with his examples? And you might say, oh, that's a 2. Oh, that's not good. So now we understand that through exploratory research, what are the dimensions that are important to students? And so we have now a better idea. It was not clear before, now it's more clear. And through descriptive research, now we actually put a number to it. They're not particularly happy, a very low evaluation. And so if I wanted to change your opinion and change your attitude and perception about my class, I might want to go into causal research. Causal research measures causal effects. So we'll vary one variable. We'll play with one variable and see the impact on another. For instance, I might say, well, here's a hammer. So don't do this at home, but here's a hammer, and I believe that if I take this hammer and I hit my hand with it, it'll really hurt. Causal research is, here we go. Boom. Ow, that really hurts. I have now proven a causal effect. Okay. But you might have some issues which are not causal. So for instance, if there's a butterfly flaps its wings in Canada and there's a tsunami in Indonesia, those things are correlated. They happen at the same time, but they're not, there's no causal effect. Okay. So now if I want to measure the causal effect of what I've learned through exploratory and descriptive research, I say, well, the chairs are not comfortable. So now I take all the chairs out. I replace all the chairs with something that I feel are high-backed and more comfortable and maybe even provide you a massage. I decide to revamp my class, and I'll put in a lot of examples. And now I will survey the people about their perceptions. And now I find, whoops, suddenly perceptions have gone in a very positive way, and their attitudes have changed. I have proven the causal relationship. It really was the chairs. Now, is there ways of doing this for us in marketing? Well, of course. I do market research to answer a managerial problem. So what is a managerial problem? Well, my sales are no good, right? So I have sales that are actually going downwards. So the question is, you guessed it, why? So the marketing people will do this research. They'll go in exploratory research, and maybe they'll look at people, they'll observe people in supermarkets. And, every time they go into the alley, they never pick up my packaging. I don't know, they look at other packaging, but they never look at mine. And so I think maybe the problem is packaging. So maybe I'll go into descriptive research, and I find through surveys that people have a very bad opinion of my packaging. It's not very clear. It doesn't say what's in it. It doesn't provide the benefit. So I'll go into causal research, which is that I'll change the packaging, put it back on the shelves, and see if my sales increase. Okay? Or I might find that people are picking up my packaging and it looks like they're looking at price. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of looking at what they're doing. So I'll go into descriptive research, and I find that people think that my product is very, very expensive. Now I'll go into causal research. What would causal research be? Well, you guessed it. I'll lower my price, right? I'm playing with one variable, price, and I'm looking at the impact on sales, very much like the hammer is impacting the hand. If sales have gone up, I have proven the causality between the price of my product and sales. Exploratory, descriptive, and causal research. Okay, folks, that's all I have for this class. It's a big class, and we're going to be coming back to these issues many, many times. It's probably one of the most important classes, and I think it's going to provide you that lens, which is going to give you a tremendous advantage going forward with this class, but also in your careers as these models are used consistently in business. I want to thank you for your attention, and I will talk to you very soon. Thank you.